Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to Online Events. My name is John Wilson. I'm here with Dominic Davies for our session, Training Counselling Students to Work with GSRD and LGBT plus client groups. So we're looking forward to this discussion for the next hour or so. And Dominic, it's great to have you at Online Events. I know you're someone I wanted to have in our programme for a long time, so it's a real thrill for Sandra and I to have you here today.
Right. Thank you, John. And it's nice to be here, and it's nice to have an opportunity to have something that I kind of want to talk about as well, because sometimes I get invited to do things and I think, oh, well, what will I say? What will I have to offer here? But my head is full of all kinds of things at the moment. So I think we'll have an interesting discussion.
Yes. It feels like that to me too. There's lots to talk about. And I also want to say a warm welcome to the colleagues who are joining us live and who are watching in the library. We really appreciate your presence and your attention. If you are here with us live, feel free to let us know what you're thinking, if you have any comments, any questions too. To settle ourselves into the conversation, Dominic, we usually ask you to say a little bit about where you're located and the kind of work that you're doing. Is it okay to start there with you?
Sure, that sounds great. That sounds fine. So I'm based in Brighton. I live in Brighton. I practice online with supervision and therapy, and I travel to London once a week to run a practice there, just for a day a week. I've kind of been slowly over the last couple of years reducing my workload for therapy down a bit and building up supervision instead, and so that happens online. But I moved out of central London a couple of years ago, and I'm loving being down by the sea. And Brighton's a brilliant place to live.
There's just something about being close to the sea that's extra special, I think.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it's a real privilege to live somewhere that's kind of near the sea, very bohemian, fairly welcoming for difference and things. Brighton's got a very tolerant kind of community, so that makes it feel a bit safer. I was in St Leonard's and Hastings for 18 months before here, and it didn't feel quite so safe to even hold your partner's hand, or walk down the street and feel like you could be okay without wondering if someone was going to get at you.
Yeah.
So those kind of microaggressions and aggressions have been on the increase in the last few years. So for people in my communities, and so you're more aware of it. Brighton, it actually just feels like being back in central London, really.
Yeah. So it's so important for us to feel safe and feel comfortable in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. So my training was in the person-centered approach. In the very first course that Brian Thorne and Dave Meehan's and Elke Lambers run. They're back in 1984, something like this, a long time ago. So it's about probably 85 to 88.
Yeah.
And I trained before that as a community and youth worker and as a residential social worker. So I've had a long life of working within the helping professions.
Yes.
And I was very fortunate to have supervision because I lived in Leicester, from Michael Jacobs, who you probably know, and Moira Walker, who both contributed quite a lot of books to the field as well from a psychodynamic perspective. And my major mentor in that period was Bernard Rattigan, who was a lovely gay man who was a university counsellor at the time, and then went on to work in the NHS as a psychotherapist. And he was kind of a role model for me and gave me a lot of support at the beginning of my career. So I feel very privileged to have been taught by so many incredible and wise practitioners and writers and teachers.
Yes, I think these are people and names that lots of colleagues of my generation kind of know of through writing and books, but it sounds like you've really enjoyed that direct contact with people who were really early in the field.
It was I kind of felt very foundational. I felt like it gave me a really good base to then go on and do my own thing, really.
Yeah. And that has shown up really through Pink Therapy, the organisation that you've created and continue to sustain. I mean, it's been a huge job over the years, Dominic, I guess.
Yeah, 20 years we've been going now this year. We just had our 20th anniversary, which is quite a long time, really.
Yes, congratulations on your anniversary. Okay, yeah.
I've never got bored. There's always more to do. And it's amazing what we've been able to do without really any external funding, without any grants, any trusts, just through lots of love and goodwill from people and running the fees from training courses and the like. So yeah, it's been a labor of love.
Yes, I'm sure. Like the amount of time and energy that goes in behind the scenes of organisations is just huge. And
well, you and Sandra will be very aware of that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciate you coming to talk about some new workshops that you're offering through Pink Therapy. Could you tell us a bit about the workshops and why that they feel important and just now, I guess?
Okay. Well, a few years ago, whilst we had been doing a lot of online, lots of face-to-face training, I decided in the move out of London to try and make things more online to reach a wider audience. We've had a lot of international people contacting us, and we wanted to kind of make it much more accessible. But you lose some of that. You lose some of the contact and the depth when you're working entirely online, I think. Because it's very hard to be in an online session for 6 hours. I wouldn't have the stamina to teach that, and I'm not sure many students would have the capacity to focus for 6 hours. But in a room with coffee breaks and the networking that goes on over that, it's a different context. So I've been sitting on a working group for the last 5 or 6 years. Excuse me. Called it's called the Coalition Against Conversion Therapy, and all of the leading psychological and therapy bodies, so BACP, UPCP, BPS, and CS, all of these have seats around the table, and we've been working together to try to look at stopping conversion therapy and the inadvertent use of it, because it's not always coming from religiously motivated people. It's often therapists who have good hearts, and they're confronted with somebody who's pleading with them to help cure them of their homosexuality or of their gender confusion or whatever, and take it all away. And we've been working on trying to get an agreement together, a document. And one of the part of that document is that we should deliver training for therapists in working with LGBT plus people. And so the document's been out, well, it got extended to include gender a couple of years ago, and it's been out now for a couple of years in this format. And part of that is that the signatory bodies have all signed up to say, yes, we need to have training for counsellors, trainee counsellors, and also for qualified counsellors. So these 3 workshops that I've decided to go on the road with are about that. They're aimed at counsellor trainers to help try to get them in to share what they have been doing, if anything. And some courses are doing some things. But my experience from listening to many, many therapists, including those that are still in training, is that very little is being taught on their programs about working with the LGBT plus communities. And so, because I've been doing it for nearly 40 years, I've developed a paradigm, a model that I think has worked very well for me, and I want to kind of share that with my colleagues in the field who are delivering training, and try and give them some tips as to how they might integrate some of the material into making the courses more effective for the LGBT plus students who are there. Because queer people, LGBT plus people, the research is showing we're overrepresented in the therapy population. Like, we take more therapy than people who are heterosexual and cisgendered. And And we have higher levels of mental health distress, as you probably know, like higher levels of depression and anxiety, substance misuse, suicide and self-harm, all of this stuff. So we have poorer mental health, and we go for therapy more often, and yet increasingly, well, not increasingly, I'm still hearing terrible stories about the misattunement or the lack of response or the poor quality responses that some of our colleagues are giving to people because they just haven't had any training.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. It's like they want to help, but they just don't really know what to say or how to do it.
Yes. Well,
So we're going to go on the road: London, Manchester, and Glasgow.
Yes.
2 days, Friday and a Saturday, and the plan is that we'll fill the room with counsellor trainers and LGBT people who are also counsellors and trainers, and just help that conversation take place. And I'll teach some of the stuff that I've been developing, and we'll help people learn from each other and the networks build, so that people will feel much more resourced to go forward.
Yeah.
So a long answer for you there.
But, a long answer, but
you know.
Okay. Really helpful, Dominic, to set the scene for where the training has come from. The document is really important. That has been signed by the major professional bodies in counselling and psychotherapy. Definitely the BACP are there, the National Counselling Society. So that's a big commitment that the professional associations are making to, like saying we need to have this training. It's really important that it's within the core therapeutic training. Yeah,
it should be. It absolutely should be. My fear is that we don't let it just become grand words, and that they put their logo on the document and don't actually follow through on the commitments and the promises that they've agreed to. So this is an attempt to try to help support that process. Yes.
Well, it's a real invitation to colleagues who might be watching this live or in the recording who are counselling trainers to come along to a workshop and see what might be missing from the training. Like, I guess in terms of the knowledge and the model, like we don't know what we don't know yet, and to like have that introduced into our awareness. And
because I've been doing this a very long time, and I had to teach myself to start with, reading every journal I could get, reading all the books. And in the beginning, when I was writing the first pink therapy book that came out in '96 now, I was able to stay in touch with pretty much every paper that had been written and every book that had been written coming from the US at that point. It's like it's taken off in the last 30 odd years, and we've moved on a lot, but that doesn't seem to have filtered down into UK training programs. And I'm curious to understand why that is and what's happening there. I mean, I've set up specialist training for therapists who want to, GSRD or LGBT therapists who want to specialize in working with our communities. And we have people who are from outside of those communities coming and doing the programs as well. But I just don't know, and maybe the colleagues watching will have some ideas as to why is it that the courses are not addressing these issues very deeply, if at all. Because I think it's an issue that needs attending to, really.
Yeah. So if any colleagues are here live with us, have some thoughts about that or some ideas about that, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And like, I'm wondering if, as you're saying that, Dominic, whether it reflects a cultural split, that like there's still a gap we're both in the UK today, and whether in British culture there's still a gap between the LGBT communities and the heterosexual community, or like there isn't such a free flow of information and relationship between those communities, perhaps. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think I think I would probably say queer people are different to heterosexual people. I'm using queer as a generic kind of reclaimed term to embrace gender, sexual, relationship diverse people. So it's a very broad category of folk that I'm including in that. But I think the experience of growing up feeling different, being pathologized by a society that treats you, as Lord Alfred Douglas put it many years ago, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. It impacts our well-being, it impacts our psyche and our ability to feel safe at who we are in the world. And that then has its knock-on effects in terms of mental health and trauma and all kinds of things that the research is demonstrating time and time again. And so our lives are running on parallel. We're part of this mainstream society,
Yes.
and also we've got other issues going on that are causing difficulties. In the same way that people of colour in Britain are part of the mainstream society, and also have issues going on as a response to having to deal with a society that's racist, that's institutionally racist and systemically oppressive. And woe betide anybody who's coming from a number of those different communities. Your people of colour and LGBT plus. It's like those intersections make even more need for good quality therapy to be available and a better understanding.
So we could make the wrong assumption that our communities, our culture is more integrated than it is, because we're living parallel lives, but actually there's a lot more going on in all of us below that surface.
Yeah. I think so. But I think it gets minimized. And, I hear therapists saying, oh, well, everybody's the same underneath. We're all the same. And that's often coming from a position of their white cisgender privilege, because their lives are not the same, and able-bodied and all the other things. Their lives are not the same as people who come from these disadvantaged or oppressed groups. But that's hard for people to hear. Like, we don't like to think of ourselves as having white privilege or able-bodied privilege, or it's like, because it makes us feel like defensive. We feel under attack, that someone's going to have a go. We're being criticized. It's just different advantages. I mean, I think I've had advantages as a gay man that some heterosexuals haven't had, because I've managed to choose my own path with regard to relationships. I don't feel obligated to get into a long-term monogamous, faithful, committed relationship. I can kind of work out the norms that work for me. That's actually, I think, an advantage has been an advantage in my life. Whereas my father was a cheater, he was unfaithful and he had affairs, and that he didn't have that advantage because mainstream society culture, that wasn't acceptable, and it was dishonest and it wasn't right. But I don't have to be dishonest because I can write my norms.
Yes, so there are oppressions in different parts of the culture. And I guess sometimes, like, we all feel the struggle of our own experience and how we're struggling to be ourselves, but in that we can miss the privilege that we have. For me, as a white straight man, like in the UK, that creates a tremendous amount of power and privilege. But often I'm more in contact with the stuff that I'm struggling with personally, and then it's easy to miss.
It doesn't feel very privileged for you some of the time, I'm sure.
Right. Yes. But then as a therapist, a supervisor, as a trainer, I might be missing, or I'm sure I am missing, of course, at times, the struggle of other colleagues and students and supervisees, clients. Do you have some sense of what is maybe going wrong in the therapy room when we haven't had the kind of education that we need? Maybe the kind of responses or things that we might be saying to clients that are perhaps not intended to be unhelpful, but actually are not helping the therapeutic process.
I think one of the things is that's helpful is that we need to have a greater level of cultural sensitivity or cultural fluency in understanding what it's like for people coming from the different cultures or communities or subcultures that are coming through our door, so that we kind of understand some of the frames of reference that they're using. We understand the significance of the language that they're using. But I think we have to go beyond pronouns. Like, everyone's kind of gets hung up on pronouns at the moment. And I think it's not about whether you say somebody is genderqueer or not. You know the difference between someone who's genderqueer and non-binary, or somebody who's pansexual or bisexual. I mean, some of those terms are interesting and helpful, and it's useful to understand that all of the terms are valid. But we need to learn a deeper level. We need to know more about the impact of minority stress on people's lives and how that affects people, or the impact of the microaggressions that have been written about. And by that I'm meaning the little sneers and looks and tuts that people who aren't part of the community, heterosexual people in particular, might give queer people who are looking different, who are expressing themselves in a more visible way. The looks that I might get if I'm holding a partner's hand as I walk down the street, those kind of little tuts, and sometimes it's shoves, sometimes it's people muttering under their breath, queer. But those take their toll. Yes, and so understanding how these things can affect people, understanding more about living with trauma and working with trauma. I mean, trauma is the new big subject for us as therapists, I think, and good. I'm really pleased it is, because I think we as queer people are living with I don't think post-traumatic stress is the right thing. It's just traumatic stress. We're living with traumatic stress pretty much from when we were first aware that we were different to others. So having to know about some of the theory and some techniques and ways of working, as well as the right language, is important, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the language is the beginning, perhaps, but there's a lot more to think about.
We have to go beyond that.
Yes. Yeah. Sounds so important what you're saying about this is not post-traumatic stress. This is not in the history.
It's not over, yes. It's not like
over.
Being a veteran and coming back from the front line.
Yes.
This is daily life.
Yeah.
For our people. Yeah.
Yeah. And those microaggressions in the way of being noticed, and an aggression too, in the way that when I'm walking down the street, if I'm holding the hand of my partner, nobody notices.
Sure.
Yeah, nobody's making a comment on that.
Yeah.
And,
It's things that people take for granted, to be able to express that in public. And for us, it's so many. It can be read in so many other ways. Are we being defiant? Are we being bold and brave when we do it? Are we being political? Is it just about expressing tenderness? Are we feeling courageous that day? It's like lots of other meanings. Is it a way of being role models for other people who don't feel yet confident to be able to do that? So it's very nuanced and layered. A simple act like holding one's partner's hand in the street.
Yes. Yeah, like there's a whole set of decisions and feelings that isn't there for a heterosexual couple.
And it's constantly being evaluated. I'm always thinking about it in my head whilst I'm doing it. I turn a corner. Is it safe in this street? Does it feel like somebody's coming in from ahead? Should I let go? Is this okay? Will they be all right? Oh, there's a gang of lads. Maybe I should let go. All kinds of things. You hear a big motorbike or a car revving up behind you. Maybe you need to play it down. Like, you just don't know. Because although we've got all of these civil protections now, and I think in Britain we're really lucky, we've got some of the best civil protections in the world, the rise of hate crimes and violence against LGBT people has gone up, not down. And it's become worse since the whole Brexit thing was announced, which seems to have given every bigot a license to express their previously internal dialogue has become external.
Right. Like people somehow feel like they're more free to say things. Yeah.
Yeah, and do things, and do things, like in terms of beating people up, or there's murders and violence and hostilities. Even though the law gives us some protection, it only gives us the protection if it gets enacted. And
and when you turn the corner into a new street, those decisions are cognitive, of course, but I guess they're also embodied from experiences of aggression.
Sure.
Like the body knows when it has been attacked in the past and is looking out for the possibility of that happening again.
Yeah. And even if we've not experienced the attack personally, we know friends of other people who have. So it's like, it doesn't have to be a lived experience to make us wary. Those kind of distal minority stressors, as they're called in the theory, tell us that actually, no, that's still something that is operating for us as if it were our own experiences. It's another one of those as if experiences.
Yeah. Okay. Now, and that could be something that could be easy for a therapist to miss in the counselling rooms. A heterosexual counsellor could easily downplay that as if experience. So an attack on someone in the community is going to feel perhaps to the client like they've also been attacked.
Sure.
And the stress of that, the trauma of that.
Yeah. I've got colleagues in Poland, and we were talking on Friday, and Poland's become ultra conservative and quite hostile to LGBT people in the last few years. And they've got clients coming into their therapy rooms who are reporting the violence and hostilities and the hate in the street. But the therapists themselves are living within those communities, of course, and they're not protected from also experiencing that. And that it makes it a very tough and challenging environment in which to be trying to be there entirely for the client's experience when you're also being triggered by going into the supermarket or reading the papers or seeing they're declaring areas of the cities or the countries LGBT free zones. I mean, like, what would happen? I don't know how I would feel if my street in Brighton was declared an LGBT free zone. It's like, what on earth? How on earth does that? I mean, it's hard to enforce, but then neighbours might start speaking about you and report you in to thugs who are going to come around and smash your house up or whatever, force you out. It's horrendous.
Wow, Dominic, that's terrifying, isn't it? And that's within Europe. I mean, Poland
that's within an EU country in Europe.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff's happening in lots of places.
Yeah.
I mean, trans people in Britain are having their homes attacked and daubed with pain and feel unsafe in the street, and that's in Britain. And even though they can report it to the police and to the housing and all of these things, it doesn't help them feel any safer knowing that they've reported it.
Yes. Yeah, like that aggression has still happened and
may happen again, and encourages other people will feel emboldened to have their go next time because they've seen that this person's been attacked once.
Yeah. Yeah, this is not like in other countries from us here in the UK.
It's not only bad countries.
Yes.
It's not only over there, it's also happening here.
Yeah.
This is not the direction I had expected our conversation to go to.
Yes. Okay.
It's quite heavy, isn't it?
But
that's the reality. That's what me and my colleagues are working with. That's how it is.
Yeah. Well, that's what feels important in terms of, for me, like this is the context that the training that you offer sits within. Maybe it's for colleagues who are not so aware of the context, somehow this is bypassed them. maybe the training doesn't feel so important somehow. But when we think about this context, it's vital that we're all aware and, well, and aware of, maybe as therapists, we might be enacting microaggressions in the therapy room.
Sure.
Without knowing.
Yeah.
Without noticing.
Yeah.
Like the assumptions that we make about our clients' gender and sexuality, and perhaps not holding our knowledge of the client. Like if we live in a dominant culture, it's so easy to revert back to that dominant culture and how we think about our clients and their lives and their relationships. But that can easily be a microaggression, I guess, or not so micro, maybe.
Yeah, I use an example often when I'm teaching of 3D glasses. So you could look at the world through a heteronormative lens, or you can look at the world through a queer lens. In fact, it's more prismatic than that, because you could have a kaleidoscope of different lenses that you see things through, see the world through. But it's like, if you can't see the person in front of you through a lens other than a very heteronormative lens, then you're missing the material, you're missing the person, and it's hard to remain attuned. So you're going to say things that just don't compute or miss the mark or offend or upset, or despite you having the best intentions and really wanting to get it right. And do the best you can, because you've just not had any training or awareness of this.
So that's one of the roles of these workshops, is to add extra prisms to our lenses, I guess, and to make sure those prisms, we're looking through them. And you probably could see my eyes dotting around the screen a little bit as we're talking.
Chat, but I haven't read it, I'm afraid. I'm noticing you looking for it, so that's great, because I haven't got that window up at the moment. I think I'll be too distracted.
Okay, well, if it's, maybe I'll catch some of those comments.
Or just comment,
Yeah, well, a colleague was saying that sometimes it feels like everything is swept under the carpet of person-centered, I work with what the client brings. And then there is a blindness to other people's plights.
I mean, I've heard, and I think person-centered therapists can be some of the biggest culprits here in some ways.
Okay.
People talk about, I just offer the core conditions, the 3 core conditions. There's only 3 conditions, and I offer the conditions, and that's enough, because the client needs to tell me about their own experience, and that completely removes them from any cultural context. It makes the client, sure, the client is the expert on their experience, but the therapist needs to have a level of fluency in being able to meet that client and speak within that language and context. Otherwise, well, they're not negotiating a fee discount, are they, for their clients? And saying, well, actually, I'm only going to charge you 1/3 of my normal fee because I've never worked with somebody like you before. And you're going to teach me a lot about what it means to be a lesbian or trans or whatever. It doesn't happen like that. And so, we need person-centered therapists to be trained in knowing more about these different cultural norms and identities and communities. And the psychology within those kind of psychological issues that happen within that. It's very light on theory, the person-centered approach, compared to some of the other modalities. And I speak as somebody who was trained in it and passionate about it. But it's not theoretically heavy. It's about bringing your whole person. But if your whole person can't meet the other person because you can't get into psychological contact with them because of issues in your past about the things you've heard about queer people, or they can't meet your psychological contact because of all the things they've heard about heterosexual therapists or white therapists or person-centered therapists or mental health professionals wanting to cure them or whatever. And some years ago, Maggie Aykroyd and I wrote a chapter for one of the person-centered counselling textbooks that Jill and Pete, I think, were producing
Mm.
on psychological context. There's a whole chapter on looking at the importance of that with regard to these communities and populations. So yeah, it's like that's the first condition. If you can't meet that, however good your core conditions are, you're not going to get anywhere. Mm.
Yes, that need for contact and to make that contact. And when we cut the 6 conditions in half, like we're cutting, the theory becomes very light. And
Right.
and I know my experience of that of only following the client, especially when there's a lot of trauma.
Mm.
And there's a lot of difficulty around relationships. I think the client can feel very on their own in therapy.
Very, very lost.
Yes. It can be a deeply respectful way of working, but it can end up uncontactful. I know that's not really the right way of saying it, but it's, I think I'm just saying it's also my experience of the approach of abandoning clients, really, which is awful.
Even though you think that you're present and you're wanting to be present.
Yes.
Paying as best attention as you can.
Yeah. And I think that is really for someone to come into therapy and then feel abandoned by the therapist. It's another layer of trauma on top. And Oh, it's a lot to talk about here, Dominic, isn't there? I'm really enjoying this. Thank you. Okay, another colleague saying, so we move to metropolitan areas for safety and are then needing to work with unlivable costs of living, austerity and prohibitive housing lands on LGBTQI folk disproportionately because we tend to have to live in cities. Yeah, so that austerity lands on the community. In order to
wages, I think wages are often much lower for, if you look at the economics, lesbians seem to earn less money than gay men, and women earn less money than men in general. Even though we've got equal pay, it doesn't actually come through. Trans people are often much poorer than other groups because for many years they've not been living at their full potential, or have sometimes for some have additional costs in managing their transition as well, or saving for surgeries or treatments or whatever. So they're financially disadvantaged as well as socially disadvantaged, and they may well want to be in a city because it's a safer space for them to be in. It might feel that where they could be in community with other people who are also trans, for example. Brighton, I think, has the largest trans community in Britain. So it's people have moved to Brighton because it feels safer, and then they've got support networks and things.
Yes. Yeah, so those financial considerations are profound as well, make a big difference. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, where someone who is living in the dominant culture early in their life can be preparing for their financial future in terms of their education and getting into working in a company, whereas for someone who is transitioning or saving for that transition, maybe they're not able to get started in the way that not started in the right way. It's the way that the culture rewards financially, I guess.
Yeah, and it might be that they just feel that they're processing so much. They're not feeling like they're fully themselves, and they're processing so much and trying to work out who am I and what do I want to be and who am I going to be. And it's only really once they've made their decision and they can move forward in that, and that might be dependent on other people in helping them do that, that they can then start to be their own person. And so there can be a number of years, 5 to 10 years of career, of drive, of education missed. People might well be behind by 5 to 10 years. Economically and socially and academically, which is tough, really. And it tends not to be talked about.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And could be easy for us as therapists to miss that,
Mm-hmm.
that financial
Sure,
impact on
sure.
clients. Yes.
When my practice was bigger, I always kept a couple of low cost places, and they were always, for the last 10 years, they've always been for trans people, because I feel they're financially disadvantaged and they're often in greater need of good quality mental health support. So that was my kind of paying it forward way of trying to be supportive. And we always have a trans bursary on our foundation diploma, on the 1-year program. We have a BME and a trans bursary with reduced fees for people, to people from those communities there. Because again, we need to capacity build within the communities and get more Black queer therapists and more trans therapists qualified and out working with their communities. And so it's our way of trying to do something about that, really, support that.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like you're putting your money where your mouth is, I guess, in quite a literal way, Dominic. And saying, yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, and I can see a colleague really resonating with this part of the conversation, saying, and those of us who are older and came out in a more hostile culture in the 70s and 80s are now financially disadvantaged as we approach our vulnerable older years.
Sure. Because people may not have partners and kids to support them.
Yes.
They may be involved in caring for their elderly relatives because they're single, and it can be tough, I think, being older. And then we worry about where are we going to live if we can't live, who's going to care for us in our old age, and if we have to go into nursing homes, are they going to be safe places for us? Are we going to feel okay there?
Not even a worry about, am I going to be appreciated and kind of loved in those spaces? Is it going to be safe?
Is it going to be safe?
Oh, well, thank you to the colleagues who are contributing to the conversation too.
Rich conversation, isn't it? Yeah, they're making some points.
It is, I really appreciate it. And there's a comment out on Facebook that I want to catch as well. A colleague saying that they work with those on the dissociative spectrum, and also and feeling like that they have, I'm paraphrasing the comment a bit, so the colleague might want to say if I'm not catching it quite right, but feeling like they're trained in doing that work. But they also see a number of clients from the LGBTQ community, and there doesn't seem to be so much training around that intersection. Yes. So an interesting comment around that maybe there is a gap in the training. So
I think there's a gap in everybody's training pretty much, unless they've gone and done specialist training. And trauma, dissociative conditions, I learned from Margaret Warner when I was doing my training all those years ago, often arise from very severe trauma or neglect before the age of 7. And certainly people are often, remembering their gender diversity, gender nonconformity from before 7, or even attractions to other people. And if they've experienced abuse and it's been quite traumatic, they may well be overrepresented in a dissociative client population. It was a good question or comment.
Yes, thank you for that. Margaret Warner's work is great, isn't it?
Yeah, she's an amazing trainer.
Yeah. Some other comments popping up here. A colleague saying, I love person-centered approach, but I think the responsibility is to then build up our knowledge in the areas we want to work in so we can be really present with our clients.
Yes. Great. Absolutely.
There's something about that approach that gives us a kind of solidity to work, but then when we are specializing, let's not just assume that that's enough.
That's enough. It's not enough for anybody. We need to build on this.
Another colleague saying we do need a backdrop of knowledge and understanding in many areas to assist us to enter a client's frame of reference. Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, to stay curious about life and
Mm-hmm.
human life, so we've got a broad as knowledge as possible, because
Sure.
we're all complex and there's
Yeah.
so much to understand about each other.
Yeah. Mm.
I'm just looking at the list of things you sent me earlier, Dominic, because there were some things that we wanted to make sure we talked about.
Sure. Yeah, I wonder how we're doing with those.
Yes. Well, one of the things we might have talked about is why are the workshops so expensive? That was one of the things on our list of things to talk about.
That was one of the criticisms I've had from a couple of people who are working as counsellor trainers, cisgender, heterosexual, as far as I'm aware, counsellor trainers, who were saying, I can't afford, this is too expensive, I can't afford. It's £450 for 2 days. I would kind of counter that with, well, therapists who are coming onto training courses are often paying hundreds of thousands of pounds for their training, and queer people who are training with their organisations are paying these fees. So £450 to go and get some training in knowing how to meet the needs, not just of them, but of the whole learning community, doesn't seem too expensive. And it's a tax-deductible, legitimate business expense. I'm co-training with, by taking it on the road, I have to account for travel expenses and accommodation, and I'm co-training with a colleague who I've worked with a lot, who's done a lot of training around in Poland. So she's coming over for us to do this project together. So there's 2 trainers working with the group to get a good staff ratio of participant to staff. Then there's accommodation, and then there's travel. And it's a tax deductible. So it feels like this is just a tiny drop out of the money that your company or your organization, your college or institution or whatever is taking, pay. In addition to that, we've got 25% of the places on the program. So if we were full at 20 people, 5 places in each workshop for LGBT identified counsellor trainers. And I'm offering those at a half price, at a very heavily subsidized price, because I think that it's really valuable to have them present, so that the expertise isn't just coming from Agata and I to the group, but they will have experiences to share about the trainings that they've been delivering and developing, tips to share, and also maybe get some work out of get invitations to come into courses and say, oh, well, could you come and do some stuff for us? So if I'm subsidizing that many, enough places there, I need to make sure that I can feed myself and make this work.
Okay. Yes.
So that's my answer to why it's £450 rather than £40.
Right. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you for that, Dominic. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, I also had in my mind, there might be some trainers whose organizations just won't fund them. I mean, I think FE and HE, the budgets are being slashed all the time. And whether there might be some negotiation for a colleague who's self-funding so that they can bring that knowledge into their training. And maybe that's just not possible in terms of the costs. And
we'd have to see really whether that's possible. I mean, I think it's appalling if that is the case, and it may well be. The course that their course leader needs to be talking about getting staff training, because I know when I've taught at universities, we have budget for going on training programs for us to train, to keep up our own CPD. And to bring that back into the course, it's important, because these courses are expensive. Counsellor training programs are not cheap trainings, and everybody self-finances for them pretty much. Yes. So the universities are making a lot of money, or the HE colleges are making a lot of money out of this.
Yes, yes.
They need to give it to their staff to train them up. And also, there's a requirement. Like the BACP and the MOU says, get trained. You need to have some training. So if you're running or working on an accredited course, they need to demonstrate that they are actually meeting that need, that obligation.
Yes, yeah. It's really helpful to talk about the costs, like, because colleagues might have that response when they see the cost, but when you're describing it, it makes sense, Dominic. It does. Another question that you were thinking could be helpful for us to think about is, like, why is it not online, or might it be online at some point? And,
I think it is partly about the opportunities that you get from talking in the breaks informally, and going for lunch together, and the kind of relationships and bridges that get built between colleagues when they're on a face-to-face course, as well as that there's a lot of material to cover, and in a 2-day course, and if we were to put that online, it would be many evenings or webinars or whatever. And it's harder to get everybody in a room together for lots of short, if we put lots of 2-hour workshops on together, will everybody manage to be in the room again for the next session? And we want to build on the learning and on their experience. So it kind of feels like, even though I've got a passion for delivering training online, and I'm doing two-year diploma online, I really buy into that value. I also think that there's a huge advantage. I mean, we have a week-long residential intensive at the beginning of the foundation program for people to do some really deep experiential work with each other, living with each other for a week. And my own training was based on that kind of a residential model too. So I've got a passion for some in-depth experiential related work. Now, we're not doing residentials for these 2 days, but I do think that we can get to a level of depth in 2 days that if we were just online, and that was their only contact with each other, that would be quite hard to achieve.
Yeah, thanks for describing that too. Like, it's about the training, but it's also about the intimacy that we can have in the room and the connections that we can make. And I really noticed what you said earlier. The trainer might be there and make a really good contact with someone who might come then contribute to their course. And I mean, at some point, maybe we will put things online, but right now it feels like where my head is at is like, I want to get these 3 done and out the way, and check that they work well, and develop the materials. Because when you're doing a new project, you're hopeful that you're going to have it right, but it might be that things will get refined and it will become easier to deliver on it in an online way. But I need to see it and feel it and touch it first, I think. Yes, that also makes sense. So watch this space and see what emerges.
We might be coming back to talk about it as an online program.
Well, I would love that, Dominic. That would be fantastic. We don't have much time left, but we do have some more questions.
Okay.
Should we catch some of those? A colleague's saying, how will this training then filter down to those of us already qualified? So if someone's already been through their course, then the tutors train. But I guess that's maybe a question about how to access this kind of knowledge.
We've already got some online CPD modules on the pinktherapy.org website for specialist subjects. So there are 16 theory modules going into our diploma 2 years, and each one of those, I think all of those are available as an individual module for people to sign up and study at home and self-study. So if somebody wanted to know more about substance abuse and LGBT, there's a module for it, or digging more to intersectionality or coming out. And so we have some individual modules there, and they can be composited together into short certificate courses. So we are already doing stuff like that. I think that the BACP and other organisations are probably going to put on some CPD. Well, hopefully they will put on some CPD for members on how to kind of address some of the requirements of the MOU. But we have some stuff happening. that's already there. So, but this is getting people while they're in training,
Mm.
because I think we need to find ways of integrating the material, not just putting an add-on one day here and half a day there. I mean, specialist stuff is important, but we also need to find ways of integrating some of these theories into the core of the course.
Yeah. So for colleagues who are already in the field, really encourage you to get over to the Pink Therapy website, get on the mailing list, the organization's mailing list, engage with the training that's there, and
And we have a closed Facebook group for people who are therapists who might want to join the Pink Therapy Facebook group. They need to answer a couple of questions, but they can find us on that group. And it's a very supportive and lively resource for therapists. It's people seem to really appreciate it, and they can just come and read stuff. They don't have to post; they can lurk.
Okay.
We made a post recently about. I asked, "Why are you getting? What do you get from here?" This is, I set it up about 7 years ago. What do you get? And look, almost everybody who replied said, "Well, I never really post anything or talk to, contribute." But I read everything and I find it fascinating. I was like, is it all right for me to still be here? It's like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's okay.
We've got over 1,000 members. I think we've got 1,100, 1,200 members in there. So it's serving some purpose, but without doing a temperature check, I wasn't too sure what that purpose was. So it was good to find out.
Well, lovely to have a safe space for colleagues to be able to learn, talk together, and listen. If that's Well, and also the same, I really appreciate the colleagues who've been here commenting today. That's been really rich. And also appreciate the colleagues who've not been typing, and been here,
just watching,
absorbing the conversation. Absolutely. You've maybe been in the library watching this, absorbing the dialogue. Appreciate all the ways of engaging. And of course, our hour has come and gone really quickly, Dominic. Thank you so much for this time together. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you and everybody here today. It's been great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for being with us. There's a couple of things we didn't get to, but maybe Dominic, if at some point in the future you're back with us, we could catch some of those things. That'd be really lovely. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I really encourage people, check out the Pink Therapy website, the Facebook group. Sandra is posting links to the workshops that we've been talking about for the last hour, so that's great. The link will also be in the resource guide. So if you're watching this in the library, just scroll down, click on the resource guide. And if somehow you cannot find this training, with all those options, just hit the big help button on the online events website and we'll put you in touch with Dominic. Yeah, great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dominic. Till the next time we can be together, we'll say goodbye for now.
Thanks, John. Bye-bye. And bye-bye, Simon. Thank you.